Hello and welcome to the first of these official monthly webinars that I host as part of the Nutrition Running Hub. This is a free Instagram and Facebook account that I've created to help provide runners with a lot more information around how nutrition can help with different aspects of their running performance. So as part of this, each month I host a free webinar on different topics. So the first official one that I've started with is of course 5 common nutrition mistakes that I see runners make. I've worked with a number of runners from a whole range of levels over the years, from those that are maybe just starting out on their running journey, those that are doing things like park runs, the Couch to 5K, to those that compete a little bit more regularly. They're a little bit more advanced in terms of their level. They do regular things like half marathons, and nutrition plays a really key role in this. So what I've put together in this following webinar is essentially 5 of the most common nutrition mistakes that I see a lot of runners make. And I've also provided, or I'm also going to talk a little bit about some top tips to help you manage each one going forward. In terms of me, my name's James. I'm a registered sport and exercise nutritionist. In terms of my background, I have a Bachelor of Science in Sports. A Bachelor of Science from Brunel University, a Master's in Sport and Exercise Nutrition from Loughborough University, and then I'm on what's called the Sport and Exercise Nutrition Register. So this is a certified accreditation program that I have to go through as part of my qualification and my ability to deliver the content that I do as part of my role as a sport and exercise nutritionist. In terms of sports, in terms of athletes that I work with a whole range of sports across a whole range of age ranges, from first team down to youth and academy level, including parents as well. So I spend a lot of time working, educating, supporting parents as to what they can do to help fuel their youth athlete too. In terms of specific sports, a couple of sports I'm currently working in includes with golf. So I work with a few professional, semi-professional golfers, football, as well as rugby. So again, different players of different levels there. I've also worked in cricket. And of course, I spend a lot of time at the moment working with a number of runners. So I'm working with a couple of runners that have different events coming up, such as marathons and half marathons as well. In terms of the role that nutrition makes, again, I often say to a lot of people, nutrition is just 1% of an athlete's or a runner's development. It's that 1% that can have a huge impact on the other parts or the other aspects of their performance. So nutrition plays a key role in terms of helping to improve performance, and I'll break this one down into a few different components now. Nutrition plays a key role in terms of improving your recovery after training sessions, after a race, after an event as well. And your ability to recover effectively will dictate how well you perform at your next competition, how well you feel in the days after a big event or a big training session as well. And as I say, this can be the difference between winning and losing. Maybe potentially your next race, if your recovery is not as good as it could actually be. Nutrition also plays a key role in helping to maintain a strong immune system. Again, there's no one food, no one drink that can boost our immune system as such. Again, but a healthy, balanced diet that's tailored around your training, around other day-to-day aspects or day-to-day activities you might do, could certainly help in terms of maintaining that strong immune system as well. Nutrition plays a key role in terms of improving that body composition. So, in terms of running, a big impact that does something that does impact your running performance is around things like weight, body mass as well. So, nutrition again, through a sort of tailored approach around your training, can certainly help in terms of improving that body composition. So, helping to reduce body fat, for example. Again, in terms of linking it in with the training, linking it in with the improvement in performance, again, nutrition essentially fuels the demands of your training. And so this can help with that further adaptation. That's going to help improve your endurance, your ability to run faster, run further, for longer without needing to stop, without needing to slow down. And that's, again, what's going to partly help in terms of that improved time to complete an event, whether that be a 10K, half marathon, any distance, will certainly play a role. Nutrition also plays a key role in terms of reducing the risk of injury as well. So injuries, they are very common, particularly in runners, particularly a sport and an activity such as running. It does place huge demand on the body itself. And so this is where This is where injuries they do occur from time to time. So common injuries you see in runners are things like stress injuries, bone injuries, and things like that. So again, nutrition can play a key role in terms of reducing that risk of injury. So making sure we are fueling ourselves correctly for the demands of your training session. But then equally, if that injury were to or was to occur, there are a few nutrition elements that can help in terms of reducing that time it takes for you to recover as well. I won't talk about injury and nutrition in too much detail in today's webinar, but I have this planned for another webinar coming up. So do keep an eye out on my social media. Do keep an eye out what's coming up, as this will certainly be an area that I will cover. As well as the physical benefits, or I suppose the impact that nutrition can have on our physical performance, it also plays a key role in terms of our mental performance. So again, nutrition plays a key role in terms of maintaining concentration, that focus. So again, helping you to stay on track, helping you to be a little bit more alert, making sure you're maintaining that target pace, if you like. So you can see nutrition plays a key role. What I'm going to come on to now is essentially 5 common nutrition mistakes that I see a lot of individuals make. The first one that I will start off with is, of course, the underfueling. So not fueling properly for races and training sessions themselves. This is the most common, or one of the most common mistakes that I see a lot of runners make. In terms of why this is an issue, if you imagine the body is a little bit like a petrol tank in your car, in the same way if your petrol tank, or if you haven't got the fuel available to get you from A to B, in terms of your journey, the body works in exactly the same way. If we haven't got the energy to meet the demands of that training session, we're going to start to struggle to perform. So, as well as impacting your performance, your ability to hit your target finish time, anything like that, it also impacts other aspects of your health. So we start to see things like poor recovery, again, the increased risk of things like injury and illness, and that's, of course, something that we want to avoid. Again, when it comes to nutrition, despite popular belief, quite often I think there is this misconception of defining certain foods and drinks as good and bad. Again, I don't think this is the case. I think all food, all drinks, um, are not necessarily good food and bad food. It's more this case of context is key. So there's always a time and a place. And I think it's then using this knowledge, working out what's going to be the most appropriate food or the most appropriate drink for that particular situation that you're actually in. So you can see a few examples on the screen. We've got a bottle of Lucozade Sport, we've got some Jelly Babies, so some Jaffa Cakes, some flavoured milk, and then a handful of dried fruit. In terms of these as options, if you're having a rest day, if you're having a sort of quiet day at home, not necessarily the best things to be snacking, just potentially with the calorie content, things like the sugar content. However, these are perfect examples to be having in and around your training. So again, these are perfect examples of some really quick release carbohydrates. Things like the flavoured milk will provide a good source of protein to help with recovery afterwards. And that's what I'm going to talk a little bit more about in today's webinar, as well as some of those going forward. So before a run then, what should you actually be having? So again, when it comes to nutrition, there is a lot of misinformation out there. There is a lot of confusion as to what we should be having. And so what I've got now is just a few tips just to maybe help ensure that you are fueling effectively. In terms of our fueling then, essentially fueling starts around 2 to 3 hours before a run, whether that be a training run, whether that be a competition. How much you need may vary depending on the duration, depending on the exercise intensity. Nutrition is certainly going to play a key role, particularly if you're onto your longer runs, or if you're doing any sort of long distance events. So again, as I mentioned before, having that fuel in your tank is going to help you to perform at your best. The reason why that 2 to 3 hour window is so important is the fact it allows time for you to take on the fuel that you need, but equally it allows your body to digest that meal. So one again, something that I see a lot of individuals do is when they consume a very large meal and then go and exercise fairly quickly afterwards. Again, that the body hasn't had time to digest the meal, and this is where you start to see this increased risk of things like runner's gut, which I'll talk a little bit about later on. In terms of meals that you choose, again, focus on those that are high in that carbohydrate, but try and lower or try and avoid any sort of high fiber and high fat foods or anything like that. Again, just because the fiber, the high fat content takes the body longer to break down and digest. So again, this is something to bear in mind. So in terms of, this is, I suppose, the science, the theory, in terms of the application and what that might look like. This is by no means a definitive list, but a few examples. And again, this is entirely up to you, depending maybe on the time of day that you're training. My go-to is always things like a nice large bowl of porridge with a handful of fruit. That could be a sliced banana, a handful of berries, maybe it depends what you've got or what you prefer. Things like jacket potatoes are always a good one. So a large jacket potato with things like some beans on, for example, could be good. Things like Weetabix are always a good one too. If you're out and about, maybe you're running later in the day, maybe you're running during your lunch break, for example. Things like pasta dishes are also a good one to take with you. Things like wraps, fairly simple, fairly easy to do too. In terms of just a note on the pasta dishes, one again, I try and choose those that are in the sort of tomato vegetable based sauce rather than the cheese and creamy sauces, just because they are much higher in the fat, much higher in the fat and so again takes the body longer to break down and digest. We can further help ensure that petrol tank, if you like, or our energy stores are topped up by maybe incorporating a little pre-run snack just before, so somewhere around 60 minutes before you actually start your run itself. That again, what you do is entirely up to you. I should say, when it comes to nutrition, it's really important to start to develop your own nutrition strategy for your races. Again, what works for one individual may not necessarily work for another. But again, you can see some really simple examples on the screen. Things like a slice of toast with some jam on, things like a piece of fruit. Again, bananas are always a really popular one. Smoothies, again, a lot of people find smoothies just really simple, quick and easy to do. So you can chuck a load of ingredients in, mix it up, blend it up, and you've got a simple sort of pre-run snack there. Things like sports drinks, and I can add to that things like energy gels. They are really quick, easy, convenient to do. You know exactly what's in them. And as I say, it's that just that really that sort of simple use, that ease of use that makes them so popular. Things like cereal bars are always a good one as well. So a very popular one with a lot of people is things like the Rice Krispie squares. But again, there's obviously lots of different brands, lots of different types out there as well. So again, it's certainly worth practicing in your training what's going to work best for you. As I say, depending on the duration of your run, depending on the duration of your event, it might be that you might need to take on some nutrition during the run itself. So if you're running for anything more than an hour, this is where you might start to need to think about taking some fuel on board. The body only has limited energy stores, so enough roughly for around 2 hours of high intensity exercise. So this is why potentially you might need to take some carbohydrate based snacks with you out on your runs. In terms of what that might look like then, in terms of the guidelines, we should be aiming for around 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour in terms of what that may look like. Again, if you're doing things like sports drinks, that would be one Lucozade Sport, so a 500 milliliter bottle of Lucozade Sport has around 30 grams of carbohydrate. In terms of powdered fuel, so I've got an example here of the Science and Sport Beta Fuel. You could use things like Tailwind. Again, there's lots of other brands as well. If this is what works for you, no problem at all. The only thing I'd say with this is, particularly if it is during a race, having to make up these scoops of powdered fuel, they are quite time consuming, and the time it takes you to make some of these bottles up or sort of pour your powder into your bottle itself. It can be quite a sort of challenge, and actually the time that it takes you to do that, you actually lose potentially in finishing the race a little bit quicker. So I'd always recommend those quick, easy, convenient sources. But again, if that's what you want to do, it's entirely up to you. Again, some people prefer a bit more. Some people like to use things like energy gels. Again, with energy gels, they are no, or all energy gels, they are completely different. Some Some vary, or they all vary in terms of the carbohydrate content, the consistency. Some will contain caffeine, some don't. In terms of rough carbohydrate count, the average gel contains around 20, maybe just over 20 grams of carbohydrate in it. So if you're trying to hit around 30 grams per hour, this would be the equivalent to maybe one to two energy gels. But again, do check the packaging, do check the label, and again, maybe practice with a few gels just to see what works best for you. Some people, when it comes to their nutrition, they prefer to use more of a sort of food-based approach. So again, you can see a few examples. Again, fruit is always a simple one, such as a banana. Things like cereal bars, things like a handful of sweets can also be quite popular as well. So if you're doing a competition or a long race, a handful of sweets, a handful of jelly, or a sort of small cupped hand of jelly babies, jelly beans, things like that, and you can stick them in some of those little sandwich bags. Stick them in your pocket for the use later on in your run. For those of you for those of you that like to run early morning, this is something I prefer to do. I'd rather be up sort of early doors and getting out for a run at sort of 6, 7 o'clock in the morning. Based on what I've mentioned so far, on that basis, you'd be, if you're going to run at 6 a.m., you'd have to be getting up around 3, 4 a.m., which is just not doable. It's not sustainable. It's not possible. So this is where a few tips to maybe help you with the early morning run. The first thing I'd do, if you are going to run early morning, maybe the night before, I'd focus on a higher carbohydrate based meal. So using some of the examples I mentioned before, again, things like pasta dishes, things like the potatoes. Again, it's up to you what you use, but anything that's sort of fairly high in the carbohydrate would certainly be a good recommendation. And then when you wake up in the morning, having a sort of small, high carbohydrate based snack, if 20 minutes, half an hour before. So if you're going to run at 6, you might be getting up at sort of 5:30, for example. So it might be a case of grabbing something quick, simple. So again, using some of those carbohydrate snacks that I mentioned, things like the toast with some jam on, things like the cereal bars, smoothies, and even using things like energy gels can always be a good one. I've done this a few times if I haven't had a chance to pick anything up in the supermarket, where as soon as I wake up, I might just sort of consume an energy gel just to give myself a little bit of fuel, just to get me ready for my run itself. So that's my first common mistake that I see a lot of runners make. My second one is around the recovery itself. So again, when it comes to nutrition, most people focus on the what they should be having before the run itself. As soon as you've finished your run, this tends to go out the window. So we sort of you finish your run, and you open up the fridge, and you just end up over consuming maybe, and you might not necessarily be consuming nutritionally beneficial food, if you like. And this is where, again, as I said at the start, your recovery strategy will your recovery strategy will dictate how well you perform at your next training session, how well you recover after a big race, for example. So I've got a few tips just to help you with this. As I say, nutrition there's a huge amount of research, huge amounts of science that show the benefits of good quality nutrition around recovery after exercise. As well as helping to reduce the inflammation, reducing that onset of muscle soreness, can also help further enhance that training adaptation too. So again, in terms of what you should be focusing on, this is where some of you may have heard of what we call the 4 R's of recovery. Three of the four R's are focused around nutrition. One is focused more about the importance of rest and good quality sleep. So if I start with the rest, this is all to do with me ensuring or trying your best as possible to ensure you are getting good quality sleep each night. We should be aiming for around 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night. Again, I know there's probably a number of factors that may impact your ability to get a good night's sleep. I will focus. I will talk about stress. I will talk about sleep here in another of these webinars going forward. In terms of maybe after a run, again, high intensity exercise such as a long run, it does place huge demand on the body, huge demands on the immune system. So as part of your post race or post training recovery, having a little nap for around half an hour or so can certainly help in terms of helping you to feel a little bit more refreshed, helping to recharge that battery, if you like. In terms of the nutrition based areas of recovery, the first one is this refuel. So, again, as I said, your body is using that fuel during your run, and over time, your body's battery or your body's fuel tank is essentially starting to lower down, starting to run down. And so, chances are, by the time you finished a long run, a big event, it's probably going to be in the red zone, or if you like, maybe your engine warning light or your petrol warning light has started to come on. And so it's really important to ensure that we are refueling ourselves correctly and as effectively as possible. So incorporating some carbohydrate into that post-exercise meal. Again, I've got a few examples in a moment. The second R is then about that rebuild. So this is all to do with adding protein to your meals, so to your recovery meals. So protein is often referred to as the body's building blocks. It's made up of a series of amino acids. And it's a bit like if you had Lego bricks, or if you've got children with Lego bricks, in the same way they join them together to create these strong structures and models. Essentially, protein is helping that within the body as well. So protein's involved in maintaining or rebuilding the structure of muscles, tissue, cells. Any structure within the body plays a key role. So ensuring you're incorporating plenty of protein is really important too. And then, of course, we have this rehydration. So again, during exercise, during training, again, depending on a number of factors such as the exercise intensity, environment that you're training in, you do start to sweat a lot. And as you start to sweat, you're losing quite a significant amount of fluid. And even a small dehydration, a small amount of dehydration, even by sort of 2%. So this could be anything from losing the equivalent to around a kilogram of fluid during a high intensity exercise. It has been shown to have a number of negative impacts on performance, so ensuring you are staying hydrated is really important. In terms of what this might look like then, again, you can see some different examples of some meals and snacks on the screen. Depending on where you are, I'd probably focus on the recovery snacks straight away. So keeping some recovery snacks in your kit bag, training bag, in the car. In the car can certainly help. So you can see a few examples. Things like fruit, things like cereal bars, things like yogurts, if you're able to store them effectively. So if you've got a cooler bag, an ice bag with you, just to keep them nice and cool and fresh. Other ones, I suppose my sort of always go-to, particularly with the snacks, is things like milk and flavoured milk. So with milk, this is more based on the sort of natural cow's milk. If you're using dairy alternatives such as almond milk, soy milk, these don't necessarily have the same nutrition quantity, the same nutrition effect. But flavoured milk basically covers all three of those. All three of the 3 R's of recovery. So covers the rehydration, so providing you with the fluid, covers the recovery, that covers the rebuild even, so helping to provide the protein, and of course the refuel, so lots of carbohydrate in them as well. So one of those, or even a pint of milk after your exercise, after your session, it is a great, really simple nutritional option to take on board until you can then get access to some more substantial food, more substantial meals. And then once you can do that, again, things like stir fries, things like any sort of meat-based dishes with some carbohydrates. So again, things like chicken and pasta, really simple, really easy to do. Things like rice, stir fries. Stir fries are always my go-to. They're really good, particularly if you've got any if you've got any leftover ingredients that maybe need using up. You can chuck them in. Chuck them in your in the meal itself. And again, it all helps with the recovery, and incorporating lots of different fruit and veg into your recovery meals helps provide the antioxidants that's going to play a key role in terms of that recovery, reducing the inflammation as well. In terms of milk, like I say, I'm a big fan of the milk. This is me just after doing the London Landmarks half marathon a few years ago, and when we finished, we're walking past a Tesco, um, and that's what I really fancied. So I did get a few funny looks on the train on the way home as I was consuming my milk to help with the recovery. In terms of nutrition choices, on rest days and recovery days. So again, on those days where you're not necessarily training, it's your day off. Again, still your body's still recovering on those rest days, and nutrition is still going to play a key role here. Because you're not doing as much movement, you're not going to need as much carbohydrate on these days. So I'd be focusing on a greater portion of protein, greater portion of fruit and veg, just to help with that recovery. So a good example, a good starting point for things like breakfast might be things like an omelette. So eggs, they are really nutritionally beneficial. Nothing wrong with using eggs at all. They do provide you with a good quality or good source of protein. And then again, you can start to add some flavour with some different ingredients. So add in things like lots of different vegetables. Again, you can use whatever you want. Maybe a source of protein, such as some sliced chicken, maybe things like ham, for example. Again, really simple, really quick, really easy to do. Maybe as a mid-morning snack, you might have something like some yogurt with a handful of berries on top. Again, entirely up to you, but again, a good little mix there with, again, the different fruits, the protein that's then found in the yogurt as well. Lunch, again, depending on maybe where you're at. Again, if you're out and about, wraps, bagels with some form of protein in, some salad, can certainly help. It can certainly help, or could certainly be a good option there to help with that recovery. Again, later on in the day, as maybe a sort of mid-afternoon snack, anything sort of that's fairly high in the protein. So again, that might be two hard-boiled eggs. That could be things like cereal bars. Could be things like making your own high-protein energy balls. It could be a handful of nuts, seeds, that sort of thing. Again, these are all just a few examples just to give you an idea. And then for dinner that night, maybe depending on what you're doing the next day, if you're having a sort of quiet day the next day, if you've not got a sort of early start or anything like that, using things like stews that are stews with lots of vegetables in. So again, in this example, I've just got some beef stew, so you can see some beef chunks with some carrots, a little bit of potato, and a few other bits there as well. So that's it, mistake number 2. Mistake number 3 that I see is essentially this mismatch between your training goals, your nutrition, and your health goals. The trouble, so what I mean here is, well, there's 2 ways basically. This is where some runners overconsume each day, and so what they're consuming outweighs the energy that they're actually expending, and this can impact their ability to hit their other health goals. So for a lot of runners, it's about maintaining that running performance, but might have other health goals at the same time, such as maybe losing a little bit of weight. Equally, some people go, I suppose, completely the opposite direction, where they're not fueling themselves correctly to meet the demands of their day, or to meet the demands of their training. And as a result, it can start to have quite a number of significant impacts going forward. So you can see on the screen the picture of the phone. Basically, if the body hasn't got enough energy to perform those day-to-day activities, a bit like when your phone goes into that low battery, low power mode, the phone still works, but those functions, they are compromised. The body is essentially doing the same thing. So this is where you start to see a number of negative impacts on your health, which I'll come on to talk about now. So in terms of how the body uses energy throughout the day, Essentially, on the left-hand side, you can see where we get our energy from. So this essentially comes from the food and drink that we consume. So it's broken down by the body into those different nutrients, gives us the energy, the vitamins, the resources that we need as part of a healthy, balanced diet. In terms of how we expend energy on the right-hand side, this is done through your day-to-day activity, your day-to-day activity, your day-to-day movement, including your exercise itself. So even throughout the day, you're still burning or still using a significant amount of energy through if you're doing lots of walking, household chores, other activities too. Obviously, if you're then doing more of the formal exercise, such as going for a long run, this is now going to increase the amount of energy that you're expending each day. The other way in which we expend energy each day that a lot of people aren't necessarily aware of is what we call this basal metabolic rate, or BMR for short. And BMR, this is basically the amount of energy that you need in order to live, essentially. So it's the amount of energy that's required to keep things like your brain function, or maintain brain function, heart function, lung function, essentially any process that is going on within the body that doesn't require any conscious input from ourselves will still be using a certain amount of energy each day. And so if you think about this as a bit of an energy balance or a bit of an equation, if we start to manipulate this now, so when the two stay the same, when they're both balanced, when they're both equal, this is going to lead to us staying weight stable. So the amount of energy they consume matches the energy output. If we start to manipulate this, so our energy intake is now greater than your energy output, this excess energy, what the body doesn't need, what it doesn't use, ends up being converted to and stored as fat, leading to this weight increase. If we go the other way, where our energy intake is less than our energy output, so maybe you're reducing your portion sizes, you're doing more movement each day. This is where we're now in that calorie deficit, and that's what's going to help with the weight loss. Obviously, being in a calorie deficit is essentially the only way you're going to lose weight. What's really important to be aware of, though, is if that calorie deficit becomes too much, if that difference between the two increases too much, this is where we enter into this low energy availability mode. And like I say with the example with the phone and the low battery, this is essentially what's happening in the body. And this is where some individuals, they are at risk of things like REDS. So REDS stands for relative energy deficiency in sport. And it's basically this phase, if you like, or this period where that lack of energy, your body doesn't have the energy that it needs to maintain all these key functions. So this is where you start to see an impact on things like bone health. So again, in runners, you start to see stress fractures, even bone breakages in some situations. Poor immune system, so again, increased risk of illness as well. For ladies, impacting things like your menstrual cycle. And you see other impacts on things like our cardiovascular health, and it's usually caused either by restricted eating, it can be caused by overtraining, so if you're training, you're running, doing loads of exercise every single day, or maybe a combination of the two, and I don't think anyone's doing this intentionally. Again, it's just being a little bit more aware of being a bit more aware of what you're consuming. It's almost this idea of fueling for the work required. So this is what, again, part of the reason I've created I'm doing these webinars, created some of these resources, is to help provide runners with more information, more knowledge as to what you can be doing. In terms of some of the signs and symptoms of things like REDS, this doesn't mean, because you're experiencing this, you have got REDS or anything like that. But some signs that maybe something's going on include things like the disrupted sleep, things like the changing things like the changing gut health. So if you're suffering with things like constipation potentially, increased fatigue, so you sort of constantly feel tired and there's no real explanation as to why. Again, poor immune functions. If you find you're constantly picking up coughs and colds throughout the weeks or over a longer period of time. Things like reoccurring injuries, particularly the stress fractures. So stress fractures are that sort of slight break within the bone itself, but not enough to break it completely. And it could even be things like poor performance in itself. So you actually struggle to maintain or struggle to perform at the level that you're actually able or capable of. And so, like I say, this can have a huge impact in terms of your overall performance, impacting your ability to train as effectively as you can. In terms of a few things maybe to bear in mind, in terms of tracking your food, in terms of tracking your training, well, if I start with the training, I think it is helpful to track your training just so you can see what you're doing, how far you're going, your progression that you're making. One thing that a lot of runners I've spoken with that they do is they start to focus on the calories that they've burnt. So when you look at things like Strava, I'm just using Strava as one example. When you look at Strava, when you finish a run, same with if you're using a smartwatch, any activity that you do throughout the day, it will tell you how much energy you've burnt. And people start to maybe focus a little bit too much on this just because you'll do a run and it might say you've burned 500 calories. The trouble with this is these guidelines, they are only a sort of, it's based on an algorithm. It's not 100% accurate at all. A good example, I like to play golf, and played a round of golf the other day, and after 18 holes, about 4 hours, it said I'd burnt about 2,500 calories. There's no way I would have burnt that amount in that amount of time. Um, so probably more realistic would be somewhere around 600, 700 calories or so. So just be aware of this when it comes to tracking and monitoring. Obviously, still track your training so you can see your durations, your splits, things like that. These devices, they're much more accurate in terms of monitoring that. But in terms of the calorie content, that's something I'd maybe overlook. In terms of tracking your food, I'd say this is useful to an extent. The reason I say to an extent is, yes, it can be quite helpful to see what you're consuming each day on a day-to-day basis around your training, when you're eating in regards to your training itself. The reason I say to an extent is the fact that for some it can become quite obsessive. So this is where they're then spending lots of time. They start to focus on the quantities and how much they're consuming, rather than looking at the importance of consuming a healthy, balanced diet. And this is where some people start to, if you know anyone that does this, where they are maybe a little bit too much or too focused on the calorie content, we can start to get into the realms of disordered eating. So again, I think it's just something that's important to be aware of. In terms of course, if you are going to track your food and drink, I'd certainly recommend doing this for maybe a couple of days at a time just to see where you're at. If you wanted to do this now, if you did want to do this, a really simple I use with a lot of individuals is this table that you can see on the screen. So you've got in the first column your meal type and time of day. So this is where you might write your breakfast at say 7 a.m, lunch at 1 p.m, dinner at 6 p.m, and then any snacks, meals, food that you're having in and around training. In the second column, this is where you make a note of the food and drink. So this is where it's really important to specify the brands. So don't just put, oh, I had a bowl of cereal this morning, just because it doesn't really give you any useful information. You could have multiple brands of the same type of food, and the nutrition content will vary quite significantly between all of them. So it's really important to specify the brands that you're having, and that would apply the same to your drinks as well. In terms of the amounts, so again, this is all to do with how much are you having. If you're in a position where you can weigh out your ingredients, perfect, great, no problem with that at all. If not, using simple measurements, so things like bottles, how many bottles of water are you drinking a day, for example? How many glasses of cups of tea, coffee did you have? If you've had things like something in a tin, did you have a whole tin, half a tin? Again, when you look at food packaging, there should be it should tell you the weight of the product. So if you've had half a 400-gram tin of soup, you know you've had roughly 200 grams. So little things like that just give you an idea as to the quantities, the portion sizes too. And then sometimes, again, obviously, you're trying to maintain that running performance, but equally, food is there as a source of fuel. It also has developed this secondary role as a soother of our emotions, and sometimes understanding a little bit about the why in terms of why you're having that particular food or drink can certainly make a difference. So in that fourth column, this is where you make a note of your reasons why. So why did you have, or why are you having that food or drink? Is it for reasons of genuine hunger, or is it maybe related to the boredom, stress eating? Maybe it's related to other factors as well. So it's a good little activity to do this, just because it does help to raise your awareness. You might go, oh, that's something I'm doing, that's not so good for me, I need to do this instead. So, in terms of what can help you with managing your overall goals, your health goals, and maintaining that running performance, this is where something that I've used with a lot of athletes across a range of sports is this idea of a performance meal. So, a performance meal is what you have before and after your training session. So, the performance meal you have before provides you with the carbohydrate, the fuel that you need to um, meet the demands of that training session. The performance meal that you have afterwards helps with maximizing or optimizing that recovery afterwards, so you're able to recover as quickly, as effectively as possible. Once we've protected that training session, we've fueled for that work required, the rest of the day or outside of this time, we can then start to incorporate or start to alter the food or our food and drink choices. So, in terms of what this might look like, this is just one example. But if you're someone that's obviously trying to run, but whilst trying to do your running training, whilst trying to lose a little bit of body fat, a really simple example. So, we've got our running session here. Let's say this is mid-morning. So beforehand, you might have something like a bowl of porridge and some of those snacks that I mentioned before. Once you've finished, you might have some flavoured milk as soon as possible, just to get that recovery going. Again, coming back to things like the omelettes, when you get time to access a bit more of a more substantial food, more substantial resources. And then the rest of the day, we've done our exercise, we've done our sort of big movement for the day. So this is where we can start to think about incorporating not restricting our calories significantly, but focusing maybe on these lower carbohydrate meals and snacks. So again, it might be maybe if you're out and about, if you depending on where you are, going back to my examples around the wraps. For dinner, it might be something like a stir fry. So with the stir fry this time, you might have your protein choice, lots of vegetables that you can add there, but maybe a lower or a smaller portion of the rice or smaller portion of the carbohydrate to go with it. Just to help, and as maybe as part of maybe a sort of post-meal or sort of pre-bed snack, something high in protein, such as a protein yogurt, glass of milk, can also help with the protein, help with that recovery as well. So again, this is just one example. There's lots of other ways in which you can periodize your nutrition around the demands of your day. Mistake number 4 I see is essentially around the lack of water or lack of fluid that runners drink. I often refer to water as the forgotten nutrient, just based on the fact that a lot of individuals don't consume anywhere near as much as they should. And this is where, if we're not consuming anywhere near, or if we're not consuming the recommended guidelines, it starts to increase that risk of things like dehydration. And dehydration can have a huge impact on the body. So this is where quite often, particularly in the summertime, you start to get things like the headaches, the dizziness, the poor concentration. And it can impact your exercise performance, both mentally, so you're struggling to concentrate, you can't starting to concentrate, that rate of perceived exertion, if you like, starts to feel a lot harder than it usually is. And then from a physical point of view, a lot of those systems within your body that are helping to maintain or helping you to run start to struggle to perform, and so start to struggle to maintain that high intensity. So this is where dehydration, as I mentioned earlier, can have a huge impact on performance, can cause you to, I suppose, ultimately slow down and reduce your ability to run at that desired pace. And obviously, you're going to reduce that risk of you hitting your sort of target completion time. In terms of monitoring your hydration status, a really simple way of doing this is things like urine colour. So when you go to the toilet, just check your urine colour. So this is a urine colour chart that you can see on the right-hand side of the screen. What we should be aiming for is, in terms of our urine colour, this pale straw colour, and that's an indicator, a good indicator that we're hydrated. If your urine colour looks this sort of dark, very dark yellow, dark orange, dark brown, that would be an indicator that you're very dehydrated. So I'd certainly recommend having a large glass of water, maybe two large glasses of water, and then focusing more on this idea of small amounts or consuming small amounts of fluid on a regular basis. So that could be, or one tip or one way to help with this is to invest in a water bottle. So invest in a water bottle, it acts as a nice visual reminder just to remind yourself to have something to drink in the first place. In terms of how much we should be drinking each day, a good guideline is around, well, NHS guidelines suggest around 2 litres of fluid per day. However, for runners or for active individuals, these guidelines will vary. So, again, depending on your exercise intensity, duration, things like body composition, things like the environmental conditions. So, again, when it's really hot, humid, you're going to start to sweat a lot more. So, recommended guidelines, I'd say, would be closer to sort of 2.5, 3 litres of fluid per day. Again, you can work out your sweat rate. You can work out how to do this by basically weighing yourself, what your sweat rate is, by weighing yourself before and then weighing yourself after the run. So if you can do this in minimal kit, if you can do this in the nude, no problem at all. And then the difference, once you work out the difference in your weight, this tells you what your sweat rate tells you what your sort of weight loss is, if you like. So let's say you start a run and you're 75 kilograms, and then when you finish, let's say you've run for an hour, and when you start, you're 75 kilos, when you finish, you're 74 kilos. So you've lost roughly a litre in fluid, or a litre in sweat, if you like. You can add, or there are a few other ways. So you can add a little bit more information to this. You can take into account the weight of your exercise or your sports bottle, so we can work that out as well. Things like the exercise duration, urine loss, if you do want to get involved in that, you can do as well. And then you can see this equation at the bottom where you can actually work out what your sweat rate per hour is. I'm not going to talk about this in too much detail now, but in the notes for this recording, I will link to an article that explains this in more detail. So in terms of what you should be drinking, so in terms of water, I'd always say this is the good starting point for a lot of people, focusing on around 2 to 3 litres of water every day. It would certainly be my recommendation. For things like milk, flavoured milk, perfect as part of a post-exercise recovery. So a glass of milk, pint of milk, it is a really cheap, convenient, easy way just to get that recovery process going. For things like caffeine, coffee, again, there is a lot of research showing the benefits in terms of consuming it just before exercise itself to help with improved exercise performance. The one thing I would say with caffeine is just to be aware of the amounts that you're consuming and the timing as well. So some individuals, they do consume huge amounts of coffee and other caffeinated products throughout the day, and particularly quite late in the day, just before bed. And this is where this might be causing sleep issues. So just to maybe bear that in mind. And then, of course, you have things like sports drinks. So not necessarily something I'd recommend snacking on a sort of normal day, rest day, but these are perfect as well as part of your pre-exercise fueling, as well as during the exercise itself. If you want to make your own homemade sports drink, again, really simple, really easy to do. So this example makes up a litre of fluid, but basically mix 500 millilitres of water with 500 millilitres of fruit juice plus a pinch of salt to help provide those electrolytes that you lose during your sweat. And again, really simple, really cheap way to make your own. And then the final common mistake that I see a lot of runners make is actually trying something new on race days, whether this be new trainers, new shoes. Probably the part I'm going to talk about is more the trying something new in terms of race day, in terms of their nutrition. So it might come as a bit of a shock, a surprise, but trying something new on race day is really not advised. The amount of runners I have spoken to or worked with, where they've trained with in a certain way with certain foods, certain drinks, and then on race day they try something completely different. And there's a few issues with this, or there's a few problems that this can lead to. When it comes to running and some of these whole body exercises, it does place very high demands on the body, and including the gut itself. And this is where some of you may have heard of this concept of runner's gut. So runner's gut is basically any I suppose exercise-induced gastrointestinal distress. So this is where you start seeing things like the cramping, the diarrhea, things like the sickness. And it's caused by a number of things. It could be the physical movement of the stomach and the intestine during high intensity exercise, such as a run. It's also that physiological change. So during high intensity exercise, there's this reduction or redirection of blood flow away from the stomach, from the intestine, towards our muscles to help maintain or sustain that exercise performance as long as possible. From a nutrition point of view, there are a number of factors as well. So it goes back to what I said at the start of this webinar around things like dehydration, around things like if you are consuming high amounts of fat, high amounts of protein just before exercise, this can also have a huge impact too. Just to highlight a few bits then, so as part of your training, I would be encouraging you to train your gut essentially along the way. So part as well as training your muscles to withstand or to be able to maintain a high intensity exercise for longer. At the same time, it is helping to train the gut as well. So this is where it is important to take this into consideration. And so in terms of what can help with this, so as I say, regular running, regular exercise can start to help build up the gut, and essentially training the gut from a nutrition point of view can certainly help. And a few things just to maybe consider. First of all, your meal timing. So, like I say, trying to consume large amounts of meals, particularly high fat, high protein meals, just before exercise. It does reduce the time it allows for the stomach to digest that particular meal. In terms of type of food, so again, in terms of type of food, so if you are having these high fat, high protein, high fiber meals, again, it's going to take longer to digest, and this is where you're going to be more susceptible to that runner's gut. Again, it is a horrible feeling having to if you're running out and about in a long run, if you're nowhere near home, if you're in a competition where you might need to stop and find the nearest toilet. And it's the same with things like hydration or lack of hydration. So starting exercise in this dehydrated state, it does increase the risk of some of those runner gut symptoms that I mentioned. So you feel quite nauseous, you do start to be a bit more susceptible to things like diarrhea, things like the vomiting as well. So during your training, it's really, again, I'd really recommend, or I'd encourage you to practice your race day nutrition strategy, what you're actually going to do during the run itself, just so your gut becomes used to it, and then actually stick to it going forward. In terms of, so you can see a few tips just on the screen there. In terms of what can actually, the other thing that can help is to actually have a look at what's going to be provided at the race itself, depending on what the race is, depending on what the event is, particularly if you're doing something a bit bigger, such as a marathon. Most marathons, you're going to get a fairly substantial or fairly regular amounts of nutrition are provided on course. So this is just a map of the London Marathon. So I've just taken this on the London Marathon website. It might appear quite small on your screen, so don't worry because I've got it zoomed in. There's a few bits I'm going to talk about. But basically, if you have got an event coming up, it's always worth having a look at the route, and it's always worth having a look online to see what nutrition is actually going to be provided. So, as I say, it's a little bit small, but you can see hopefully you can see these sort of white circles with the blue W's. These represent your water stations. There's you can see these Lucozade markers that represent where you're going to get energy gels. And then you can see a few others where you're going to get things like the Lucozade sport drink along the way. And something that can be, well, there's a few things that might help you is to have a look at actually what you're going to get in the first place. So on the London Marathon, you get bottles of water, small bottles of water every 2 miles. With things like Lucozade Sport, I should say it's not bottles itself, it's cups. I think they're about 250 millilitres of Lucozade Sport in those. And you get them at miles 9, 15, 21, and 23. And then you get energy gels at miles 19 and 22. As I said at the start, if there are other products provided apart from water, it's certainly worth maybe trialing these just to see how you get on with them. So, Lucozade Sport gels, I have had them myself. I tend to use Science in Sport because that's what I prefer. That's what works for me. But the Lucozade Sport gels I found incredibly or a lot sweeter than the Science in Sport ones. I ran the London Marathon back in 2022. Um, and I did get to the point where I did grab one of these just for the sake of it, and I tried having it, and I really struggled with it. So when it comes to your race preparation, during your training, I'd either practice with what you're going to be given on the course, so you're used to it, or if you've got any friends, family, supporters coming with you to watch, I'd maybe again might take a little bit of planning ahead. But I'd basically say to them or get them to carry some extra supplies with you just so you've not got to try and run with a load of pockets full of a load of gels, other bits as well. So this is what I do with any race. When I did the marathon, I had lots of friends and family around the course, and I'd given them bottles of Lucozade, some extra energy gels, other bits as well, just in case I needed to top up. So at certain points, they could have them ready, and I could just grab them as I ran past. So I hope that was useful. They are 5 of the most common nutrition mistakes that I see a lot of runners make. So hopefully some of those tips, advice has helped you. The last few things from me around this is first of all my top tip, and this would apply to any athlete, any individual that I work with, is to practice what works for you. So try different foods in training, try different drinks, use your trainings as a chance to practice your race day nutrition strategy, ready for the competition itself. As I said, tip 2 is always don't forget to drink. As I say, I see it, one of the most common things I see a lot of runners do is the fact they're not even drinking a lot. And again, it's not just runners, all athletes, even in most individuals, most of the time, they're not consuming anywhere near that recommended sort of 2 to 3 litres of fluid per day. As I said, tip 3, don't forget the recovery. I think this is so important. So thinking about those 4 hours of recovery. So from a nutrition point of view, your refuel, your rehydration, your rebuild. And of course, the importance of good quality rest. Again, sleep has such a huge impact on so many aspects of our health, our well-being, our exercise performance as well. Like I say, sleep is another topic I've got lined up for some of these webinars going forward. Another little tip I always think is a good one is to keep some snacks in your car, your kit bag. So if you have maybe pushed yourself, you've maybe overdone it, yeah, sometimes with planning and preparation, you go from one thing to another. So keeping some really simple, easy to store snacks in your kit bag, gym bag, such as cereal bars, such as energy gels, just purely for the quick and easiness and convenience of having them there. Supplements, I know I haven't really talked about supplements in today's session, but again, supplements is another topic I've got lined up for another webinar to come. If you are considering using supplements, it's always worth just checking if it's actually worth taking. The supplements industry is absolutely in terms of the values through the roof, well into the billions now. Yet there's probably only less than 10 different supplements that actually have strong science, strong evidence to show that show benefits, show their use. So just be aware of that. And again, there are a lot of risks associated with certain supplements. If you are going to purchase any supplements, just make sure you are buying these reputable brands that have been certified, they have been tested for any bad substances too. So thank you very much for watching this. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you're watching this webinar back, this for those of you that are maybe seeing this for the first time, this is the first webinar or first official webinar, as part of something I've recently created called the Running Nutrition Hub. So this is something I run, and it's basically to provide runners with nutrition advice, nutrition information to help them get the most out of their training, but also their health and well-being as well. If you're on Facebook, if you're on Instagram and you'd like to join, then by all means feel free. As I say, it's a free free pages to join, and each week I'll be posting regular content on a whole range of topics. I do things like Q&As, I do things like recipes, things like that as well. And so if there's any topics you'd like me to cover, then please do get in contact, please do get in touch. I will be hosting, as part of this, a free webinar each month, so do keep an eye out on this as well. So I haven't got a date for the next webinar, at this time of recording. I haven't quite got a date for the next webinar, but in the next webinar I'll be talking about how you can use nutrition to help optimize, maintain your running performance, but also whilst losing weight. So this is a topic, I put out a poll about what topics individuals would like me to cover, and this is the one I got back most, so I'll be doing that in my next webinar, so I'd love it if you can join. With these webinars, they are always recorded, so I basically do them twice. I do them live with Q&A with individuals that do join the session, then I record them again myself, just on my own, talking through the slides. So this is one that I'm recording for the second time. So you'll always have access to these if you do want to watch them back. Again, I'd love to grow this as much as possible. So if you know any runners, if you're part of a running club, if you know any individuals that are looking for a little bit more advice around their nutrition, I'd love it if you can tag me in this on your social media if you'd like to join. Again, share those social media links that I mentioned there. So it's just called at the Running Nutrition Hub, and it's by me. So my name's James. If you are looking for further support in terms of your nutrition and your running, I have an online nutrition for running course. So it's a 6-module program that you can basically do in your own time, and it covers a number of topics. So I'll show you a little video. So in terms of the course, it's broken down into 6 topics. So there's my what I call food foundation, so an introduction, why all those different food groups are important for health and well-being as well as performance. There's a module on nutrition for training, so a little bit more around what to be having before exercise, before training, during, afterwards, to help with recovery. If you're training at different times of the day, trying to manage other health goals. There's a module on competition, so again, on race day, competition day, the travel aspect as well. So if you're moving about, you're traveling about for events, then there's lots of information there. There's a module on injury, illness as well, and how nutrition can help with that. So if you are looking for a little bit more support, again, there's a whole module dedicated to you there. In terms of supplements, as I said, supplements is another area where a lot of individuals see runners as this quick fix, this quick and easy solution, but there are a lot of risks involved in terms of taking supplements. And again, there are definitely a few supplements that can help in terms of running performance. So there's lots more information in there, including some discount codes to certain supplement companies that I have partnerships and links with. And then the final module is what I call my nutrition for life. So this is a module that's basically based on how nutrition applies to other aspects of your health and lifestyle. So I talk about things like meal planning, navigating the supermarket, understanding food labels, nutrition tables, things like takeaways, eating out, and then a little bit around things like stress and sleep management as well, just because I think stress is one that a lot of individuals are facing at the moment. And as a result, may be impacting their sleep. So there's lots of tips about how to manage your sleep, how to manage your stress too. So if you want to sign up to that, the link to join it, the link to access it is on my website. This is just some of the reviews that I got I've had from runners that have completed the course so far. There's only so many I can fit on a slide. So if you are interested, like I say, the course has got really good feedback. So if you do want, or if you are looking for some further support, then the course is there for you to access. I also work one-to-one with a whole range of athletes as well. So I do it either as a one-off consultation, a package of sessions as well. So I can help you with your training goals, health goals, competitions, and things like that. As part of it, I offer a sort of free discovery call. So if you are interested, you're looking for a little bit more support, that discovery call, it's about 20 minutes or so, and it's a chance for me to find out a little bit more about what you're trying to do. And equally, and how I can help you. And equally, you can find out a little bit more about me as well. So if you are interested, just drop me an email, and you can see my email address just at the bottom on your screen. So that is everything from me from this webinar. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch and listen to this. I do hope you found that helpful and beneficial. Like I say, if you're on social media, you can see my social media accounts. I'm mainly on Instagram and Facebook, so it's just James Fleming Nutrition. I have my website where I am trying to do more in terms of regular blogs, additional information on there as well. And then my email address, if you do have any questions or looking for further support, is just jflemingnutrition at gmail.com. So that is everything from me for this webinar. Like I say, I will be uploading these webinars each month, so do keep an eye out for the next one. But that's everything from me. Enjoy the rest of your day.